Let's talk about the base size of models at tournaments. The last tournament I went to, I used my Battle Sisters, the Adepta Sororitas. Some of the models I have are metal and on 25mm bases. I took some spare 32mm bases that I could stand them on for the game if need be. The guidelines for the event were to use the base size the current model is sold on. With my first opponent, I pointed it out, asked if it was necessary, and they said no. With the second opponent, I had the same response. It would be a faff, 25mm is fine. In the third game, I was among the highest scoring players of the first day, and a tournament organizer was nearby to watch. I asked them if I should put them on the 32mm base, and they shrugged and said, I guess. I asked my opponent, and you know what? This player with the highest score of the event so far did not care. And there was £40 of store credit on the line. That is 5 whole seraphim worth of money. Or Zephyrim. The tournament organizer shrugged and said, fine by me. And that is the attitude of almost all tournament organizers I have ever met. And no one was watching the lowest scoring players where an Eldar player with an all jetbike army on the 75mm Space Marine style oval bases instead of the clear plastic flying bases was facing an Imperial Knight player whose armigers were all on diorama bases. Maybe 120mm instead of 100mm. It is such a small thing to let people play with the bases their display models are on instead of the ones Games Workshop has encouraged. If base size is all important, we should stop buying models and use correct size card tokens. Cut the box art out of discarded boxes and put that on a card circle. After looking into it, that isn't such a bad idea. You should do that. What brought all of this on? Well, Games Workshop recently released a base size guide within their tournament companion. This is available to download with a link in the description. Today I expect to become comically angry as I try to explain why you should not care about base sizes in your games and also why you should not care about base sizes in tournaments. The arguments for following base sizes in and out of tournaments are not new. They have not popped up in the last few days after Games Workshop released this base size guide. It's the same comments we have heard for years. But to quote Games Workshop, the base size guide is not for use outside of tournaments. The only tournaments they apply to are matched play tournaments. So grand narrative tournaments, base size shouldn't matter. From the words of Games Workshop, these are for tournament organizers. This information is not a requirement for all games of Warhammer 40,000. That is a direct quote I will keep using. If people say, well, Games Workshop published this, so it's meant to be used in all games. First, no. They didn't. This information is not a requirement for all games of Warhammer 40,000. And second, this was published in the Tournament Companion document. If you are playing a game with a list that you might take to a tournament, this is not playing a game at a tournament. You and your opponent are not expected to follow this guide. Will these tournament guides be used in everyday 40k? Oh, no doubt. As Dr. Krankenfoof says, tournament rules are all the time rules. I am not Dr. Krankenfoof, despite accusations. Even without the list of base sizes, there have been people for years making comments about the correct base size. As soon as the Space Marines were sold on 32mm bases instead of 25mm bases, I have heard this. I have been told this. There are 2 people at my local club of like 40 people who make these comments. They want to play under tournament conditions with tournament boards, tournament card restrictions, and a tournament mindset. And if we were at a tournament, I would indulge them. Tournament rules for tournament games. But they don't go to tournaments. And I do understand that you have models on bases, that if you go to a tournament run by Games Workshop, you will have already put your models on the Games Workshop tournament base size. I am not expecting you to swap it back to a different base for a weekday game. If you went back and played 2nd edition or 4th edition, you will be fine with Space Marines on 32mm bases, even though 25mm bases was the base size then. Please don't also expect or even mention to people that the base size of their models doesn't match the guide. I know you may think you are doing them a favor, that you assume they may eventually go to a tournament and assume that those tournaments follow this guide. But it has this feeling of, hey, I see you have dyed hair, I'm fine with it, but you want to be careful because other people won't like it. The suggestion is still that the person is doing something wrong and they should fix that to appeal to a pedant who isn't in the room. Don't invite hypothetical tournament extremists into your friendly game. And am I wrong? Or is it the Games Workshop base size guide that is wrong? Yes, this is the part of the video where I list a lot of the possible errors for laughs and japes. But it is also the part where I point out that Games Workshop doesn't follow Games Workshop rules. The battle reports in White Dwarf, the armies shown off in White Dwarf, and on Warhammer Plus don't follow these odd base sizes. And in the Games Workshop White Dwarf, there is a debate about whether you can have tanks on bases or not. Internally, they are not consistent. The document says, oh, the Invader ATV uses the hull of the model. Here it is on a base in White Dwarf. What if there was the opposite of that? The Defiler is not sold with a base. Now it needs a base. Did you bring a dinner plate for your Defiler? If you didn't, then it's illegal. If you think that is a really big base size, open your 40k app and look at the Index Dark Eldar for the Court of the Archon, and make sure your models are on 25-meter bases. You control every objective on the table at once. The Windrider jet bikes use a small flying stand, but you also measure from the model if it overhangs, which it does. The Sniper Shroud Runners are large flying bases. These two models are the same size. The Lord of Contagion is currently sold on the wrong base size. You want the 50mm version from the Dark Imperium 8th edition starter set. Lord Felthius, the version currently on sale, has a 40mm base. Games Workshop gives you a base, here you are, and then says, don't you dare use it in tournaments. Because remember, this is just for tournaments. What about when Games Workshop gives you two bases? Junith has a large flying base and a 50mm base with a hole for the small flying base stem. Which one did you pick? Was it the right one? The 50mm base is apparently correct. The Carnifex is on the oval base, not the circle base, like the one I have. The Hive Tyrant is listed as being on a 50mm base. They are sold on 60mm bases. That makes sense, because the Swarm Lord is on a 60mm base, and you build the Swarm Lord from the Hive Tyrant box, which comes with a 60mm base. But you've got to put your Hive Tyrant on a 50mm base. The document is law. We must all follow the document. Do not doubt the document. You better all be rebasing your Hive Tyrants for preparation for tournaments. If you think the document's worth following, you better be doing this. It's the same for other game systems. Warhammer Fantasy and the Lord of the Rings. With Warhammer Fantasy, you can make up a movement tray that's big enough so that where you would put the bases is where they go. You mark on the bit of card or whatever you're using as a movement tray where the base size is for the new base. Then you put your 25-ish millimeter square base in that hole. That's fine. For Lord of the Rings, well, here's a horseman on a 40mm base. The rules say it should be a 25mm base. So if you glue your horse's head and have the horse vertical, that is correct on a 25mm base. So this isn't a 40k exclusive thing. This isn't limited to old models. The brand new Swooping Hawks are meant to be on 28.5mm bases instead of the 32mm bases they are sold with. Are you going to rebase these brand new models? Is it in preparation for something? They could have copied the Games Workshop website, which also lists base sizes, but they didn't. Is that an accident or is it intentional? Ooh, are we going to see Swooping Hawks sold with smaller base sizes? You don't know. You don't know. What is a mistake and what is intentional will cause fights. So this can't be like all my Index Error series because who knows what will happen. You can't trust this document. Don't base your models following this document. Vulcan Hestand, he's standing. on a 25mm base, but is expected to be on a 32mm base, whereas most other Space Marine characters are on a 40mm base. If that is for an upcoming replacement model, it is on a smaller base than its fellows. Ezekiel of the Dark Angels has not followed this trend and remains on a 25mm base, which is the base the model is sold on, if you can get the model. If someone wants to make a conversion of Ezekiel using the Primaris Phobos Lieutenant Librarian model, I think they're all lieutenants, the Lieutenant Librarian model that's in the Phobos armor, and say that's Ezekiel on a 40mm base, I don't think they should be punished for putting it on a different base size than the old 25mm base that's in this document. Trazen the Infinite is sold on a 25mm base, but with a recommendation to use a 40mm base. Is Games Workshop prepping us all for a change with a new model, or is this another mistake? If it's a future model, why not update this document later on when such a model comes out? So this is a mistake, unless... oh no. They are not going to update the document. If the 40mm for Trazen is in preparation for a future release, and the document is there in preparation for that release, the document with all these other oddities is not going to be updated. There is another reason not to care about what it says. It can't adapt to new releases. Here we have a contradiction in theory compared to the Hive Tyrant. It's not just the base that the model is sold on. So what do you trust, the base size the model is sold on, or the base size that's in the document? Someone's going to be rebasing and maybe rebasing back. What do you do if you have the old Aegis defense line? How do you rebase that to match the new Aegis defense line? The hull is the measurement, and there is a height difference on parts of the model. You can't factor that in with base sizes. Oh, and you're using the hull of a tank. Okay, fine. Which version? If I have a 2nd edition Immolator, or a Horus Heresy Rhino, that is a slightly different size to the current Sororitas Immolator and Rhino. You can't standardize hulls of tanks unless everyone buys the new model and adds or doesn't add the hedge cutter spikes to the front. You can't standardize unless everyone buys the same model and builds it in exactly the same way. If a new Rhino comes out, you shelve all the previous models forever and must build and paint the new one. Obviously, we will not do that. Should you ignore the Games Workshop document in favor of the ITC version? Well, now you have two different base size lists. Only the ITC tournaments will use the International Tournament Circuit base size guide, unless they drop their version for the Games Workshop version. What is acceptable in one place is a violation of basing rules in another. You can't win, so please do not care about base sizes. What about legend rules? This is a Games Workshop guide for tournaments, so if you run a tournament and allow legends because you radiate self-confidence, you will either have to not care about base sizes or have an extended list of units, or something like go with what the model was sold on most recently, even though we know Games Workshop doesn't follow that. Despite everything, maybe you want to rebase your model to match this guide. It is a pain to rebase. You could get base extenders, you could glue your 25mm base on top of a 32mm base, cut the models off the old bases and glue them onto new bases. It's relatively cheap to buy a big bag of bases. But what if you need a smaller base? What if your model won't fit? Oh, well, you better buy the newest Games Workshop version of the model. If you have a Cadian heavy weapon team, that's a 50mm base. The Katachan heavy weapon team still sold by Games Workshop is on a 60mm base, and that's the size in the Games Workshop basing guide. You can't use one as the other if you care about base size, and the 60mm weapon team version looks awful on a 50mm base. Are you going to have two bases and magnetize all the models to move between them? Should we magnetize all our models to bases because Games Workshop will change the base sizes of every unit eventually? What would your youngest self want to do? I don't mean as a child, though it can mean as a child. Did you buy some models and think, yep, I knowingly paint these models for a short amount of playing time and then will put them away forever with the current edition, with their current codex? I don't think you did. I think you wanted to get longevity out of them. The easiest way to do that is to keep playing with them as they are. do not care about base sizes. Even after you rebase, they'll only change the base size again. Oh, you put your Chaos Space Marine Possessed on 25mm, well now they're on 32mm, well now they're on 40mm. Keep up, keep rebasing, keep up. The Voidsmen at Arms are on 32mm according to this document. They are not sold on 32mm bases. Is that a mistake? Is that Games Workshop enforcing a new base size? What do? You can't use this document. In 3 months, this may change back to 25mm bases. What if it doesn't? Games Workshop doesn't update Imperial agents, they don't seem to care. One agent sister battle model is 115 points, has been for months. If this is the tournament way, you will have to rebase your Voidsmen to 32mm, and in September, if it changes to 25mm, rebase them back. Oh, you must follow it. These are the divine commandments of Games Workshop, which everyone must follow. For rules consistency. Otherwise, 40k isn't balanced. Did you know that the commitment to base sizes is the only thing maintaining balance in 40k? Or maybe don't buy new bases. You could use imagination. On tournament tables, I have seen Jenga blocks laid down and been told that that single block that comes up to a Space Marine's leg is actually 6 inches high. That is not 6 inches high, but you will pretend it is, along with pretending the windows and doors of buildings are not there. If it really comes down to the millimeter, you can measure from a 25mm base an extra 3.5mm radius to get to the Voidsman's 32mm base they apparently should live on. I think the cheapest version is to get a bit of paper that is the correct base size if you want to do that, and glue that to the underside of your model. Paper is really easy to remove. If the base size changes again, it's not a massive cost, and you don't have to cut a metal slaughter base model off its 25mm slaughter base to try and fit it onto a 32mm solid plastic base. Have you heard me talk about base sizes enough? No, of course you haven't. Here is 26 minutes more about why base size does not matter. Except for when it kind of does. Have a great day not rebasing your 40k models.